Yeah, I want you to do something for me, just for a second. Close your eyes. And picture the American West. I mean, really picture it. The rolling plains, that huge empty sky over a canyon, the rugged pioneer thing. What does that sound like?
Wow, I know what it sounds like. I'm hearing it right now. And I bet everyone listening is hearing the same thing. It's those wide open chords, right?
Yeah.
These slow, majestic harmonies that just sort of hang in the air. Maybe there's a solo trumpet in the distance. It feels foundational, like it's always been there.
Exactly. It feels like geology. Like it grew out of the rocks, not like somebody wrote it down. But here's the hook for today's deep dive, and it's a big one. That sound. That quintessential American landscape in your head. It wasn't discovered by some cowboy in Wyoming. It wasn't hummed by a plusioneer heading down the Oregon Trail.
No, it was invented, I mean, really, constructed from the ground up by a Jewish son of Lithuanian immigrants, a man born and raised above his family's department store in Brooklyn, New York.
That paradox is exactly what we're digging into today. We are looking at the life and the mind of Aaron Copland. But this isn't just a biography. We've got a whole stack of sources here. Biographies, music theory books, even FBI files, personal letters.
Right.
And we're going to use them to try and answer a very specific question. How does an artist invent a national voice basically out of thin air?
And not just that, we're going to look at the cost of that invention. Because Copland's story is really about how the political climate, I'm talking about the Great Depression, the McCarthy era, how those things didn't just influence his art, they lived.
I'm going to push back on this idea that simple art is, easy art. Because with Copland, achieving that famous simplicity was an incredibly complex, highly intellectual, and frankly, a sometimes agonizing choice. So let's start at the beginning. Brooklyn. The year 1900.
November 14th, 1900. Aaron Copland is born. But to really get him, you have to look at the name. The family name wasn't Copland, it was Kaplan.
Oh.
Kaplan. Conservative Jewish immigrants from what's now Lithuania. His father, Harris Morris Kaplan, anglicized it. The story that Aaron always told, the classic Ellis Island myth, was that an immigration officer changed it because he couldn't spell.
Right, you hear that story a lot.
But the records actually show his father changed it himself, probably after spending some time in Scotland before he even got to the starts.
So that's the first layer of reinvention right there. The name itself is an adaptation. It's like the family was already practicing this idea of, molding yourself to fit a new world.
It is. And the world he was born into was aggressively urban. They lived above the family shop, H.M. Copland's, on Washington Avenue. Aaron later called it a neighborhood Macy's.
So not a log cabin.
Definitely not a log cabin. It was the absolute hustle and bustle of immigrant New York. The noise, the streetcars, the shouting, just, constant energy.
I'm trying to imagine the future dean of American music there. Was he, surrounded by music? Was his dad pushing him to be the next big thing?
Not even close. His father had zero interest in music. He was a businessman, a pillar of the community, a staunch Democrat, but art, that was not on his radar. He actually thought music was kind of a waste of time for a boy.
Okay, so where did it come from?
The musical gene came from his mother, Sarah. She played piano and sang. But the real catalyst, the person who actually opened the door for him, was his older sister, Lorene.
The unsung hero sibling. It's so often the case in these stories.
It's absolutely essential. Lorene was the oldest, and she was studying at the Metropolitan Opera School. She'd bring home the libretti, the scripts for the operas, and little Aaron would just devour them. She gave him his first piano lessons. She was his bridge from the world of retail to the world of high art.
She showed him there was something else out there.
Exactly.
So, okay, he gets the bug, but when does it go from, this is a fun hobby, to, I'm going to be a composer?
That happens around age 15. He sees a concert by Ignacy Paderewski, the super famous Polish composer and pianist. And that was it. That was the lightning bolt moment. He decided he wasn't just going to play music, he was going to write it. But as soon as he decides that, he hits a wall.
Let me guess. The establishment.
Yeah.
The old guard.
The definition of it. He finds a teacher named Reuben Goldmark. Now, Goldmark was a big deal. He'd even taught George Gershwin for a little while. And he gave Copland this amazing, solid foundation in the Germanic tradition. We're talking Beethoven, Brahms, rigorous harmony.
The musical equivalent of eating your vegetables.
Totally, you need them. But Goldmark was incredibly conservative. For him, music history basically stopped with Richard Strauss. Anything after that, anything dissonant or modern, he called it musical ugliness. He absolutely hated it.
So you have this teenager in New York City at the very moment modernism is exploding everywhere, and his teacher is telling him to write like it's 1850 in Germany.
Precisely. So what does he do? He starts leading a double life, a musical double life. He writes these very polite, structured, safe sonatas for Goldmark to keep him happy.
Drives lessons, yeah.
But at night, in secret, he's writing these daring, strange, experimental pieces that he just shoves in a drawer. He never showed them to Goldmark. He knew he'd just get yelled at.
That is such a relatable creative struggle. The work you do for them versus the work you do for you. But he couldn't stay in that drawer forever. He had to get out of New York to find his real voice.
And in 1921, if you were an ambitious young artist who wanted to be on the cutting edge, there was really only one place to go.
Paris.
Paris.
The whole Lost Generation scene. Hemingway, Picasso, Gertrude Stein. Just thinking about it, the cultural energy must have been incredible.
He called it the headiest cultural atmosphere of the century. Copland reads about this new summer school for Americans at the Palace of Fontainebleau, and he convinces his parents to let him go. And this becomes the single most important decision of his life, because this is where he meets the teacher who changes everything, Nadia Boulanger.
Nadia Boulanger. Her name comes up so much when you read about 20th century composers. She's a legend.
She is a titan. But what's so interesting is that Copland almost didn't study with her. He was really hesitant at first. He actually wrote in a letter, "No one, to my knowledge, had ever before thought of studying with a woman."
Wow. That really puts you in that time period, doesn't it?
It does. It shows you what she was up against. But he decided to attend one of her classes just to see what it was like, and he was instantly converted. He called her an intellectual Amazon.
Intellectual Amazon. I
Yeah.
love that. What does that even mean in a teacher?
It implies a kind of rigorous power. She wasn't just a nurturing presence. She was formidable. She knew everything, from Bach cantatas to the latest Stravinsky, inside and out. And unlike Goldmark, she was radically open-minded. But she taught him one concept that became his guiding principle, la grande ligne.
The long line. Okay, let's stop on that for a second because it sounds like music theory jargon, but I feel like it's the key to understanding why his music works so well later on. What is la grande ligne?
Okay, think about a badly written TV show where scenes just happen one after another, but they don't connect. There's no forward momentum. That's a story without a long line. Boulanger taught that a piece of music has to have a sense of inevitability, a journey.
So it's not just a collection of nice sounds.
No, it's the idea that from the very first note, you should feel the pull toward the final note. Every moment has to justify its existence and lead to the next.
Got it. So every note has to earn its place.
Exactly. She gave him the structural discipline of the Germans, but with the aesthetic freedom of the French. And while he's in Paris, he's just soaking it all up. The avant-garde, Le Six, Ravel, Satie. He even meets his hero, Igor Stravinsky.
So he's finally found his people.
He has. And he realizes that modern music doesn't have to be angry or chaotic. It can be sharp and witty and precise.
Okay, so he spends 3 years in this creative incubator. He hones his craft. And then, 1925, he comes back to New York. And he comes back with a mission.
A very specific mission. The mission was to affirm America.
Sounds like a campaign slogan.
It kind of was, but an artistic one. He was hugely inspired by the photographer Alfred Stieglitz.
The guy who championed Georgia O'Keeffe and Ansel Adams?
That's the one.
Yeah.
Stieglitz had this idea that American artists had to stop just imitating Europe. They needed to create art that reflected the ideas of American democracy.
That's a very noble, very big goal.
Right.
But practically, what did that even mean for a composer in 1925? Was there an American classical music to build on?
Barely. And that was exactly the problem Copland faced. He looked around and saw what he called no usable past. Most American composers at the time were just writing second-rate Brahms. You could go to a concert in New York, close your eyes, and think you were in Vienna.
So if he wants to build an American sound, he has to find some kind of native raw material. Where does he look?
There was only one place to look, really.
Yeah.
The one truly unique, powerful American musical form at that time.
Jazz.
It had to be jazz. But here's the little twist on the story that I find so fascinating. He didn't have his big aha moment about jazz while he was living in Harlem or hearing it in clubs in New York. He had it when he was in Vienna.
Wait, he had to go to Austria to really hear American jazz.
It's that idea of distance, right? Sometimes you're too close to something to see it clearly. He was traveling in Europe and he heard a jazz band in a cafe in Vienna, and suddenly, against the backdrop of waltzes and European formality, the Americanness of it just jumped out at him.
The rhythm, the energy.
The syncopation, the blues notes, that nervous energy, it was so distinct, he realized, that's it. That is our folk music.
So he comes back to his studio near Carnegie Hall and starts injecting jazz into his compositions.
He does. He writes these fantastic pieces like Music for the Theater and his piano concerto, and he uses polyrhythms.
Okay, define that for me, polyrhythm.
It's simpler than it sounds. It just means you have two different rhythms playing at the same time. Think of a drummer playing a steady beat with his foot, but a really complex off-kilter rhythm with his hands.
Ah, okay, it creates a tension.
A real driving nervous tension. And that's what he wanted. He wanted to shake things up. He said he wanted to be seen as the bad boy of music.
And did it work? Was he the bad boy?
It worked for a while. It definitely got him noticed. The critics were intrigued, sometimes a little scandalized, but by the late 1920s, he felt like he was hitting another wall. He felt his music was becoming too intellectual again, too abstract. He wrote this massive piece, the Symphonic Ode. It was brilliant, but it was just hard for orchestras to play, hard for audiences to listen to. He was drifting away from the listener again. And then the entire world collapsed.
The Great Depression.
The 1930s. And we cannot overstate how important this moment is for his career. This is the pivot. You have to put yourself in that time. People are starving. The economy is gone. There are bread lines down the street. And suddenly, the idea of writing a complex avant-garde piece for a tiny audience of elites in tuxedos, it just felt wrong.
It feels completely disconnected, morally bankrupt almost.
It felt indulgent, and financially it was unprofitable in every sense of the word. The orchestras couldn't afford to rehearse these difficult pieces, and the audiences didn't want to be challenged. They wanted comfort. Copland realized the whole modernist project had lost its buoyant experimental edge.
So he needs a new philosophy.
He does, and ironically he finds it in a German concept, Gebrauchsmusik,
Gebrauchsmusik,
which literally translates to music for use.
Utility music. That sounds so unromantic.
It does, doesn't it? Like something you'd order from a catalog. But the philosophy was powerful. It's the idea that music should serve a purpose in the community. It shouldn't be locked away in an ivory tower. It should be music that students can play, music for the radio, for school plays, for movies. It's about reestablishing contact with a mass audience.
So he makes a conscious decision to simplify his style. But simplify can be a loaded term. It sounds like dumbing down.
And that is precisely what some of his old avant-garde friends would accuse him of.
Yeah.
But for Copland, it wasn't dumbing down. He called it developing a vernacular style. He wanted to speak the language of the people. And the breakthrough piece, funnily enough, wasn't about America at all. It was about Mexico.
El Salon, Mexico.
1936. He'd been to Mexico on vacation and just fell in love with this wild, chaotic, vibrant dance hall called the Salon Mexico. He took popular Mexican folk tunes and wove them into this incredible orchestral piece. But, and this is the crucial part, he wasn't just arranging them. It's not a medley. He fractures them, he changes notes, he messes with the rhythms, he puts them through his modernist filter and reassembles them into something completely new and completely his own.
So he's using the folk material as a starting point, not an end point.
It's a perfect way to put it. And it was a massive, massive hit. It proved to him that you could write accessible, popular music that was still brilliant and sophisticated. And that became the blueprint for the great Americana works that would define him.
Okay, so this brings us to the big three, the ballets. Billy the Kid, Rodeo, and Appalachian Spring. This is where he literally invents the sound we were talking about at the start.
This is where he invents the sonic west. You listen to Billy the Kid from 1938, he uses real cowboy folk songs like Get Along, Little Dougies. But again, he uses those complex polyrhythms. He makes the simple sound incredibly sophisticated. He captures the grit and the violence of the West, not just some romantic postcard version. The gunfights in that ballet sound like actual gunfights.
And then comes Appalachian Spring in 1944. I mean, this is the one, if you know one piece of American classical music, it's probably the Simple Gifts section from this.
It won him the Pulitzer Prize, and it's the absolute masterclass in his technique. Now, Simple Gifts is an old Shaker hymn. Copland didn't write the tune, but he immortalized it. And the secret to why it sounds so American is all in the harmony.
Okay, give me the theory. Why does it sound like a prairie and not, say, a German forest?
It's all about the intervals. In European romantic music, think Wagner, Tchaikovsky, it's full of harmonies built on thirds. They're rich, they're lush, they're close together. It creates a very thick, velvety texture. Copland just strips all of that away.
What does he use instead?
He uses fourths and fifths. They're called open intervals. If you play a C and a G on the piano at the same time, listen to the sound. It's hollow, it's stable, but it's also kind of empty. There's space in it.
Ah, I see.
Copland builds his chords by stacking these open, spacious sounds on top of each other. The music itself mimics the physical landscape, the vastness, the distance between two mountain peaks. He called it a transparent and bare sound.
That's incredible. He literally engineered the sound of distance into the notes themselves. He created a sonic horizon line.
He did, and in doing so, he became the people's composer. But just as he's reaching the peak of his popularity, his old friends from the serious music world start sharpening their knives.
Of course.
Yeah.
Success never goes unpunished in the art world.
Never. While the public is eating up Rodeo and Lincoln Portrait, the intellectual elite were getting very suspicious. Copland's good friend, the composer David Diamond, wrote him this letter basically warning him. He told him he was in danger of selling out to the mongrel commercialists.
Mongrel commercialists? Ouch, that is harsh.
It is. They accused him of pandering, of writing toothless entertainment. They basically said he'd abandoned his post as a serious modernist artist and turned into a pop star.
How did Copland take that? That has to hurt, coming from your peers.
He had a really profound and I think correct defense. He wrote that the composer who is frightened of losing his integrity by contacting a mass audience is no longer aware of the meaning of the word art.
Whoa, that is a mic drop.
It is. He's saying if your art is so fragile that it can't survive contact with actual human beings, then what good is it? He believed that in a democracy, especially during crises like the Depression and World War II, the artist has a social responsibility. He wasn't selling out, he was reaching out.
And speaking of reaching a mass audience,
Yeah.
we have to talk about Hollywood. Because he wasn't just in the concert hall, he went to the movies.
He did. And just like he did for the ballet, he completely reinvented the film score.
What was the norm before him? What were movie scores like in the 30s?
The dominant style was Max Steiner. Think King Kong or Gone with the Wind. It's this lush, wall-to-wall, late romantic sound. If a character feels sad, the violins weep for them. If they're in love, the horns soar. The music is constantly telling you exactly what to feel, every single second.
Over the top.
Very. And Copland comes in and does the complete opposite. He brings that lean style to Hollywood. He uses smaller orchestras. But his most radical and influential tool was silence.
Silence. In a movie, the studios must have hated that.
Oh, they were terrified of it. They think the audience will get bored. But Copland had the confidence to let an intimate, emotional scene play out with no music at all. He would wait, and then he'd bring the music in at the very end of the scene, not to dictate the emotion, but to confirm it, to put a frame around it.
That shows so much respect for the actors, for the script, to the audience.
It really does. He scored films like Of Mice and Men and The Heiress, and he won an Oscar for The Heiress in 1950. And that style, that open, spacious, restrained sound, it became the template for the Hollywood Western for the next 50 years. Anytime you hear that big sky music, you're hearing the ghost of Aaron Copland.
So by 1950, he's at the absolute pinnacle. Pulitzer Prize winner, Academy Award winner. He is, without question, the dean of American music.
Yeah.
But we're moving into the 1950s. And in America, for a man with Copland's political history, the 50s meant one thing.
The Red Scare.
Yeah.
This is the dark chapter. And to understand why he became a target, you have to remember his background. He's the son of immigrants. He lived through the Depression. His entire populist turn was based on a deep sympathy for the common person.
I mean, fanfare for the common man. The title says it all.
Exactly. He was a leftist. He was never a card-carrying member of the Communist Party, but he was heavily involved in what was called the Popular Front. He supported the communist ticket in the 36 election, the Progressive Party in 48. He believed that art should be socially relevant.
Which, back in the 30s, was not a radical position for an artist in New York.
No, it was practically the mainstream for intellectuals. But by 1953, the political world had changed completely. Those same beliefs were now seen as dangerous, even treasonous. Copland's name appeared on an FBI list of 151 artists with communist associations.
So the dean of American music becomes a political suspect. What were the actual consequences?
Public humiliation and censorship. His piece, A Lincoln Portrait, a work that is literally a tribute to Abraham Lincoln, using Lincoln's own words about democracy. That piece was pulled from President Eisenhower's inaugural concert in 1953.
That is just, the irony is staggering. Banning a tribute to Lincoln because the composer is supposedly un-American.
And it gets worse. A few months later, he was hauled before a secret hearing run by Senator Joseph McCarthy and his chief counsel, Roy Cohn. They grilled him for hours about petitions he'd signed and groups he'd associated with years earlier.
Did they ask him about his music? About Appalachian Spring or Billy the Kid?
Of course not. They didn't care that he had written the unofficial soundtrack of American patriotism. They only cared about trapping him, getting him to name names or commit perjury.
How did that experience change him?
Well, he wasn't destroyed professionally. He was too famous, too established to be fully blacklisted like some Hollywood screenwriters were. But the emotional toll was immense. He started quietly resigning from organizations. He became much more cautious in his public life. He said the Cold War created a mood of suspicion, ill will, and dread that was poison for an artist.
It's just so sad. The man who set out to affirm America ends up feeling dread about his own country.
And this political chill coincided with another big artistic shift. And this is where his story takes another unexpected turn.
Right, because if you look at his career up to this point, you'd think he'd just double down on the populist style. Just keep writing rodeo over and over. It's popular, it's safe now politically. But he doesn't do that.
No, he does the opposite. By the 1950s, that accessible, folk-based Americana style was starting to fall out of fashion with the next generation of composers and critics. They were starting to call it middlebrow.
The insults are back.
The insults are back. The new cool thing, the cutting edge, was serialism, the 12-tone technique pioneered by Arnold Schoenberg. It was coming out of post-war Europe with composers like Pierre Boulez. It was highly mathematical, abstract, atonal music. To the average person, it sounded like chaos.
So Copland, the man whose motto was connect with the mass audience, starts writing 12-tone music. That seems like a complete betrayal of his own philosophy. Why would he do that?
It's a fascinating question. I think part of it was a fear of being left behind. He didn't want to become a museum piece, the grandpa of American music, while all the young guys were exploring this new territory. He felt a deep need to stay relevant, to keep evolving. So he started incorporating the 12-tone method into works like his piano quartet and the piano fantasy.
But did his music start to sound like that jarring European stuff?
And that's the genius, and maybe the tragedy of late Copland. He couldn't help but make it his own. You know, Schoenberg used the 12-tone rows as these rigid mathematical formulas. Copland used them as a source for melody and harmony. He found a way to make 12-tone music sound, well, tonal. It still sounded somehow like Copland.
Okay, the critics might have been intrigued, but what did his audience think? The people who loved Appalachian Spring.
They hated it.
Yeah, I figured.
They found it dull, impersonal, chaotic. They wanted another big sweeping ballet, and he gave them these dense intellectual chamber pieces. But Copland defended it. He had this great quote. He said, "I've spent most of my life trying to get the right note in the right place. Just throwing it open to chance seems to go against my natural instincts." He saw serialism not as chaos, but as a new form of discipline. But it did mark the end of his era as a massively popular composer.
I want to shift focus a bit to the man himself. We've talked about the music, the politics.
Yeah.
Who was Aaron Copland when the concert was over and he went home?
He was a very private man, and a huge reason for that privacy was that he was gay.
Which, in the mid-20th century, was something you absolutely could not be public about.
No, you couldn't come out in the way we think of it today. It would have destroyed your career. But in his own life, among his friends, he was quite open. He accepted his sexuality early on and didn't seem to have much anguish over it. He just lived his life with a quiet integrity.
And he had significant relationships.
Oh, yes. His partners were often talented younger men in the arts. The most significant and long-term relationship was with a man named Victor Kraft.
Tell me about him.
Kraft was a gifted photographer and a former violin prodigy. They met in 1932, and it was a long but very turbulent on-again, off-again relationship. Kraft could be very erratic and cause Copland a lot of stress, but Copland remained incredibly loyal to him for decades. Even after Kraft's death, Copland provided for Kraft's son in his will.
This says a lot about his character, a deep sense of loyalty.
It does, and that generosity extended to his students and colleagues. I mean, there's a reason he was called the dean. He spent his summers teaching at Tanglewood. He helped found the American Composers Alliance to support other artists. He wasn't just building his own career. He was trying to build an entire infrastructure for American music.
There's a fascinating detail in the sources about his actual composing process. You mentioned he wasn't this divinely inspired genius type.
Not at all. He was a craftsman. He described his own process as assembling materials.
Assembling, like building furniture.
A bit like making a collage. He kept notebooks his whole life, and he'd jot down little musical ideas, a four-note melody, a cool rhythm, a weird chord. He called them his gold nuggets, and he'd just collect them for years.
And then what?
Then, when he got a commission for a new piece, he'd go back through his notebooks and start pulling out these nuggets and see which ones fit together. He might use an idea he wrote down 10 years ago. He didn't write from beginning to end. He'd compose different sections out of order and then figure out how to stitch them together later. It was like solving a puzzle.
That makes the feeling of la grande ligne, that sense of inevitability in his music, even more amazing. If he's piecing it together like a quilt, but it sounds like it flows like a river, that's mastery.
That is the art that conceals art.
So as we move into his later years, the 60s and 70s, the composing slows down.
It does. At one point, he said it felt like someone had simply turned off a faucet. The ideas just weren't coming anymore.
For any creative person, that must be the most terrifying feeling, to just run dry.
It must be. But Copland, being Copland, didn't just sit around and feel sorry for himself. He pivoted one last time. He became a conductor. He started traveling the world, conducting his own music with all the major orchestras. He made definitive recordings of his work. In his final decades, he became the ultimate guardian of his own legacy, ensuring the music would be heard exactly as he intended it.
And he lived a very long life.
He did. He lived at his home, which he called Rock Hill in upstate New York. He sadly developed Alzheimer's in the 1980s, and he passed away in 1990 at the age of 90. His ashes were scattered at Tanglewood, the place where he had taught so many.
90 years. He saw practically the entire 20th century.
From horse-drawn carriages in Brooklyn to the space age, he saw it all.
So when we step back and look at the whole picture, what's the headline? What is the ultimate legacy of Aaron Copland?
I think the legacy is that he created an identity where there wasn't one. Before Copland, American classical music was, for the most part, a pale imitation of Europe. After Copland, it had its own voice, its own sound, its own landscape. His friend, the composer Ned Rorem, said it best. Aaron brought leanness to America. Thanks to Aaron, American music came into its own.
He gave us a voice.
He held up a sonic mirror and showed America what it could sound like.
So I want to leave our listeners with one final thought to wrestle with. We've talked about the two Coplands. There's the simple Copland of Appalachian Spring, the folk hero. And then there's the intellectual Copland, the Paris-trained modernist who later wrote 12-tone music.
The two sides of the coin.
Yeah, right. So here's the question. Was that famous Americana style, that sound of the West that feels so authentic, was it a genuine expression of his soul? Or was it a brilliant, calculated mask? Was it a costume that this incredibly sophisticated, urban, modernist intellectual put on in order to survive the Great Depression and connect with his country?
And that's the tension at the heart of his entire life's work. The music sounds so natural, so inevitable, like it just had to be that way. But the choice to write it, that was anything but. That was a deliberate, intellectual, and strategic choice.
And maybe that's the most American thing about him in the end. The ability to reinvent yourself, to decide what you want to be.
And then to convince the rest of the world that you've been that thing all along.